Hello and welcome. Let's dive right into your UPSC Daily News Summary for November 9th. We're going to connect today's biggest headlines straight to the syllabus points you need to know.
So, what's on the docket today? We've got some serious federal tensions brewing in the Northeast, brand new guidelines to fight AI deepfakes, and a really important policy shift that's all about protecting our marine life. Let's get right to it.
First up, we're jumping into General Studies Paper 2. We'll be unpacking some pretty critical updates in governance and international relations that are really shaping things both at home and abroad.
Okay, let's start with a major one for internal security and federalism. In Manipur, Kuki Zao groups are pushing for a separate union territory, complete with its own legislature. They're saying that coexisting in Manipur just isn't possible anymore, and are even using pre-independence history to make their case. The union government, though, has drawn a line in the sand, calling the demand unacceptable. So you see the tightrope the center has to walk here, right? They have to reject this fundamental demand but also keep the channels open for a political solution. It's a classic case study in conflict resolution and the tricky nature of India's federal structure.
Now let's turn our attention to the judiciary and a topic that's absolutely crucial: access to justice. The Supreme Court has called out some major failures in how we're compensating victims of crime. And this isn't just about paperwork. The court pointed to a really tragic case in Maharashtra, where a rape survivor actually died while waiting for her full compensation. That points to a deep systemic problem.
So what's at the heart of this issue? Well, a report from NowSAR gives us a number that is, honestly, it's just shocking. 7.91%. That's it. That's the tiny fraction of undertrials who've actually used legal aid. And the main reason? Most of them simply don't know they have a fundamental right to get free legal help. It's a massive gap in our justice system for the most vulnerable people.
And this quote from a Supreme Court judge, wow. It really brings home the human cost of all these delays and failures. Think about it. An individual spending more time locked up waiting for their trial than the maximum possible sentence for the crime they're accused of. That really cuts to the very core of what justice and liberty are supposed to mean.
Okay, let's broaden our focus with three other key updates on the governance front. Over in Maharashtra, there are calls for a white paper on some land deals, putting a big spotlight on transparency. In Delhi, the High Court is looking into challenges against the Transgender Persons Act, which is a core issue for social justice. And finally, the Enforcement Directorate is still very active under the PMLA, attaching properties linked to the PFI and carrying out raids in a human trafficking case.
The integrity of our elections is also under the microscope. There have been a few recent incidents that really highlight the challenges in making sure our elections are free and fair. In Bihar, for example, an official got suspended for mishandling VVPAT slips. They were found on the roadside. And there are also worries about power cuts at the EVM strong rooms there. Meanwhile, in Punjab, a senior police officer was suspended for allegedly misusing his power during a by-election. These aren't just one-off mistakes. They show real stress points for the Election Commission of India.
Shifting gears to international relations, this timeline really shows us a direct cause and effect playing out in the region. So you have the terror attack in Pahalgam, then India's response with Operation Sindoor, and now, look at this, Pakistan is changing its laws to create a chief of defense forces. This is a huge deal. It tells us they are directly reacting and that the lessons from these recent conflicts are actively reshaping their entire military command structure.
All right, let's pivot now to General Studies Paper 3, where we'll explore that really interesting intersection of economy, environment, and technology.
Big news for our oceans. The government has just rolled out new rules for fishing in our exclusive economic zone, and it's a major step for both the economy and marine ecology. So what's new? Well, first off, they're prioritizing cooperatives and fish farmer-producer organizations. Then, and this is a big one, they're banning destructive methods like bull trawling. They're also making management plans mandatory to help fish stocks recover. And they're promoting alternatives like seaweed farming to ease the pressure. This is a perfect example of trying to strike that crucial balance between development and sustainability.
Now let's talk about resource security. Take a look at this chart. It tells a really stark story. China has an incredible grip on rare earth elements, controlling 70% of the mining and a mind-boggling 90% of the processing. For India, the strategic implications are huge, right? We need these elements for everything from our phones to our defense tech. So what can we do? Well, one really cool idea being looked at is urban mining, basically pulling these valuable materials out of our mountains of e-waste.
Everyone's worried about deepfakes and misinformation, and for good reason. The new India AI guidelines are tackling this head-on with a key concept: content authentication.
What is it? Well, simply put, it's a way to verify where a piece of digital content actually came from. To make this work, the government is proposing that social media companies will have to label any content that's generated by AI. It's a direct policy tool aimed squarely at the deepfake problem.
These numbers, well, they're staggering. We're talking about over 100 million people in India with diabetes, and another 136 million who are pre-diabetic. It's a massive health challenge. But here's where science and technology might just offer a new path forward. A recent study is highlighting something called metabolic profiling. Think of it like a super advanced blood test that can spot the tiny chemical clues of a disease long before you even feel sick. This could be a game-changing early warning system for diabetes. It's a perfect example of using cutting-edge S&T to solve a major public health crisis.
Okay, let's move on. Our next section bridges GS Paper 1 and 4, where we'll get into society, ethics, and the real human side of all these policies.
Now, this is a quote you are absolutely going to want to remember for your GS4 ethics paper. The CGI designate, Justice Suryakant, is saying that the vicious trolling and use of deepfakes against women journalists can just be brushed off as normal. He's making a direct link between this kind of online abuse and the wider threat to press freedom, which is a powerful ethical statement about our public discourse.
I think this slide is fantastic because it shows two completely different ways of governing, being proactive versus being reactive. On the one hand, you have the Tribal Affairs Ministry, which is planning ahead, creating a national framework for relocating communities from tiger reserves before it becomes a full-blown crisis. On the other hand, in Uppada, they're only proposing a massive seawall after coastal erosion has already wiped out over 250 homes. It just perfectly illustrates the difference between smart foresight and expensive crisis cleanup.
Less than 1. That's the number. India's deceased organ donor rate is less than 1 per million people. That's a silent public health crisis. So to tackle this critical shortage, the National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization, or NOTTO, has come up with a key recommendation. Let's train first responders, like paramedics at accident sites, to identify potential donors. It sounds simple, but it could be an absolute game changer.
Okay, time to switch gears. Let's hit a rapid-fire round of key facts that you're going to need for your prelims exam. Ready?
First up, a person in the news. Professor Rasaraman, who was known as the Pitamah of Indian computer science, has sadly passed away. In defense, the Indian Air Force held its anniversary air show in Guwahati. That's a big first for the Northeast. On the infrastructure front, tolls have started on the Dwarka Expressway, and the Chennai Metro was used as a green corridor to transport an organ. Very cool. And finally, for institutions, the pharmacology lab at the All India Institute of Ayurveda got key ISO certifications from the Bureau of Indian Standards.
So we've covered the news, and now it's your turn. Let's apply some of that knowledge with a couple of practice questions based on what we just talked about.
Here's your mains question for today. It's asking you to critically analyze those new AI governance guidelines and to really zero in on that content authentication idea we discussed. How well can it actually fight deepfakes? A good way to structure your answer would be to talk about the vision, the mechanism itself, and of course, any potential challenges.
And one for prelims, the National Database on Conservation Community Interface, or NDCCI. Remember we talked about it. Which ministry is behind its policy framework? Is it Environment, Tribal Affairs, Rural Development, or Home Affairs? The correct answer is B, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, which goes back to that whole proactive approach to balancing conservation and community rights.
And we'll leave you today with a final thought to chew on. Based on everything we've looked at, from internal security to climate action, where do you see the biggest governance gaps that India really needs to fix? Keep thinking, keep preparing, and we'll see you in the next explainer. Thanks so much for tuning in.